to start off, could you tell us a little about yourself and your role, and then a little bit about Marathon and why the position was created?
Sure. So first of all, Kath, thanks so much for the invitation to participate in this conversation. I truly believe that it's an important one for rural communities to have. So to start, I will share with you that I'm a rural generalist family physician here in the community of Marathon. I've been here for 25 years now and am part of a group of now 9 physicians, most of whom work clinically part-time, but have other commitments across the system, whether it's system leadership or research or local healthcare administration. The population currently is about 3,500, and we also serve 2 local Indigenous communities. So we think the catchment's about 5,000 overall. Like many small communities, we have a small hospital with an acute and chronic care section and emerge department. We provide obstetrical care, chemotherapy, palliative care, sort of the usual basket of rural services, including primary care. And of course, in this past year, the services of COVID care, including assessment center and that kind of work as well. So I've been here for 25 years, as I mentioned, and came initially as a group of 6 physicians. There was 1 physician left standing at the time. The community had a contract that allowed for 4 physicians to be here and funded in a sort of bundled fund with some incentives that were applied to 4 physicians, but they were down to just 1. And at the time, a group of 6 of us came to fill those remaining positions. And so the issues of recruitment and retention have been really top of mind for me since we came. We were on the cover of the National Medical Journal, the Canadian Medical Association Journal at the time, with the headline that youthful enthusiasm solves physician shortage in Marathon. But I think it was actually much more than youthful enthusiasm. It was actually a very intentional approach that the town took at that time. And it has, I think, been the philosophy of an intentional approach to recruitment and retention that has brought us to the point that we are, including the last 10 years of having Brett as our community connector.
Okay. And so can you tell us a little bit how the position was established, how it's funded, and whether there's cash and in-kind contributions?
So what I would say is 10 years ago, we entered into a period of time. We had 3 physicians choose to leave for a variety of reasons, sort of all at once, a couple for professional reasons and wanting to switch career paths and pursue anesthesia. And they were a physician couple and left at the same time. Another left at the same time to pursue being closer to extended family. And we had another couple that actually had a planned sabbatical at that time, which they canceled in order to stay and support the group that remained behind. But we recognized at that time that the challenge of managing the clinical service and teaching that we wanted to do through the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, and some of the family commitments that each of us had, wanting to be good parents and good partners, meant that we couldn't contribute the kind of really good energy that it takes to put a best foot forward for the community and the group and take care of all of the emails and phone calls and sort of the customer service work of recruiting physicians. And as I mentioned, I think Marathon has had an understanding born of crisis 25 years ago that physician workforce is important for the whole of the community. So 25 years ago, there was a volunteer committee of the town. It included many members of the Chamber of Commerce, the hospital board chair, the mayor, and they contributed a lot of volunteer time. But like many volunteer efforts, I would say it wasn't always as organized as they wanted. And so up to a certain point, their recruitment efforts had been unsuccessful. But there was an understanding that a collaborative partnership with intention and purpose and a vision around recruitment and retention could actually move us, likely quite quickly, from a place of feeling fragile to a place of having a workforce that felt like it could flourish again. So the original contributors were the hospital, our local physician group, put some funding in. Our local industry, we have a gold mine locally, and they put in about $10,000. The hospital put in about $10,000. The physician group put in about $10,000 at the time, and the town of Marathon. So there was roughly $35,000 initially that were contributed to a part-time position. Brett may have mentioned to you that he, at the time, was the local golf pro. So had some fairly intense seasonal work, but the rest of the year was much less intense from a work standpoint for him. And so he was able to spend that time recruiting locums, hosting learners, being a bit of a concierge for people when they came to the community to ensure that they felt welcomed.
In terms of the deliverables you set, what's the process that you use? And can you give us some examples of what Brett's deliverables are?
So what the message that we have given Brett is that we are in continuous recruitment mode. So when we have a vacancy or we have a specific maternity leave or parental leave that we're trying to fill, Brett will specifically identify that and go after filling those positions. So that kind of deliverable fluctuates a little bit through the year or year over year. But his other deliverables are to ensure that he welcomes every learner that comes to the community, welcomes every locum that comes to the community. He actually does much of the outreach for our locums and scheduling. So we tell him when we need locums, and he responds by filling those locum positions, organizing to meet them when they arrive, providing them with a welcome basket, ensuring that they have some social connection and some activities to get to know the area when they're here. And then he does a debrief at the end in order to provide us feedback. And I think for our locums, it sometimes feels safer to have a conversation with somebody who's not a direct peer. So he does that, and that kind of work is built into his job description and his deliverables. His success over time with enabling our group to have remained at or above our designated contract positions for physicians, and his success in terms of the satisfaction responses that we get from locums and learners has really enabled some of our partners to reach out to him and say, we're looking for a physiotherapist, or we need a couple of nurses at the hospital fairly urgently. Can you lean on your connections to fill these gaps? So we have over time increased the deliverables to broaden it from physician recruitment and retention to healthcare recruitment and retention. That's fairly new and a little bit more sporadic. Our hospital actually does have a dedicated HR person, but Brett still does much of the welcome once those people have been recruited, and welcomes them, supports them when they're here. And that is built in now to his job description. The other piece, Kat, that I would say that's really important is that although to this point, I think I've focused this conversation on recruitment, Brett also has a huge role to play in retention. He's part of our staff wellness program at the clinic. He helps organize social events for clinic staff and physicians on Canada's National Physician Day on May 1st. We all arrive to work to small gifts on our desk and thank you notes that he provides on behalf of the community. And those kinds of things, I think, have been really important small gestures in the big picture of retention, and his focus on ensuring that our current physician group is retained is also part of his job description and his deliverables.
And for the community, how, since his position has been in place, how aware is the community about the position and Brett's successes?
So one of the things that we have built into Brett's job description is an encouragement to celebrate success. So he will often write a small article for the paper. He'll take pictures. We still have a weekly newspaper. I know lots of small places don't. We still do. And we tend to reach out through the media channels that we have. So we have a Facebook page, we have our local newspaper, and Brett will often post pictures and sort of let the community know, hey, these two locums were here, and here's some of the activities that they did, and here are their reflections on the community. This is what they said, or this is how wonderful it was, and thank you, community, for helping to welcome them. So it's a bit of a celebration of Brett's success. It's also an acknowledgement of the things that people like in the community, and the ways in which the community helps to contribute to welcoming learners and locums. He will do that as well when we have learners from the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, small picture in the paper or on the Facebook page, to let the community know that they're here and to encourage the community to participate in welcoming them. So, I think the community is quite aware of Brett's role, and certainly, I guess part of what I would say, Kath, is in some ways the community may be becoming a bit complacent about his success because we haven't had a crisis. And I think people are often more visible when we're emerging from a crisis successfully. Sometimes we don't notice so much what's going on in the background when everything seems to be going well. But I do believe that people are aware of Brett's specific role in physician recruitment and retention, and certainly the community is aware that in comparison to other communities of Northern Ontario, we are in a very fortunate position, but it's not a lucky position. It's an intentional, strategic position of having adequate physicians, and it's because of all of the work that Brett and the community have done to support physician resources that we are in this position, and we have not struggled in the last 10 years since Brett came into his role.
And Sarah, do you think it's necessary for it to be a dedicated position? Could it be wrapped into HR or somebody else's role?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, Kath. And what I would say is that I see Brett's role now as actually a really critical piece of our healthcare infrastructure. I also see a very particular skill set in Brett, which is his willingness to take a customer service concierge kind of approach to things. And he has periods of time when, we don't need many locums, when we don't have a lot of learners, that things are fairly quiet. But he also has periods of time, particularly sort of March, April, May, when we're recruiting locums for coverage of summer vacation, or, if we have a crisis where somebody has to go off urgently and we need to bring in locums at short notice, where he really needs to be able to pivot in his role and spend the time that needs to be spent to deliver the locums that we really need to be able to keep the physicians in a situation where they're happy to be retained here. So I think the risk of having it be a position that might be off the side of somebody else's desk is that the need to respond at times in ways that can be a little bit unpredictable, I think is more limited when it's off the side of the desk. Brett's role as a dedicated position, even as a dedicated part-time position, with a bit of flexibility, I think has really been part of the key to his success in the role, that and his customer service approach.
So I think it's 960 hours a year. Is that sufficient, or is that an expression of the funding, or where's the chicken and the egg in that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what I would say is we actually pay very little attention to the hours that Brett puts in. So nobody is tracking that. What we have said is, if it takes you half the time to be able to bring in the locums, to do the scheduling, to welcome people, to support them, and you're meeting your deliverables, that's great. And there will be months when you don't have to spend the time. But there may be periods of time when we'll have more hours in that month than your strict than the budget might allow if we were really tracking things month over month. For this year, as an example, a COVID year, we've had very few learners because of pandemic restrictions here in Canada, and few locums have been enabled to travel because of some of the travel restrictions in Canada, given our COVID numbers. So the demands on his time have actually been less, I think, less than they have in years past, when many of us were vacationing and locums were freely available and we had lots of learners. But we're not decreasing the amount that he's paid. He is meeting the deliverables that we're asking of him. And so I think that kind of approach of trust and oversight from a deliverable standpoint, but not necessarily from an hours standpoint, really has been what's worked. And I think it's part of what's attractive about the job for him, is the flexibility in it.
And
So yeah, it's hard for me actually to say whether the hours are the right number of hours, but I think what we understand from Brett and we check in with him about as a governance group regularly is whether he feels like what he is paid is a reasonable value of the time that he is spending. And his reflection generally to us has been, yes, it is.
okay. And do you even add his pay over months, or just so if no one's counting the hours, then you just divide it by 12, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. And what I would say, and this is a little bit of a follow-up to the governance question that you asked. So we have the governance committee. We meet twice a year. And really, truly, it is a governance committee from the standpoint of what's the budget? What kind of travel plans do you have? Do you have what you need? And is what you're paid the right amount for the time that you're spending? But his day-to-day bosses, to use it's not a term that I like, but I think it's a term that's understood, are really the physician group. So it is us who say, look, we've got 2 learners coming, or we need 3 locums for these periods of time in the summer. And Brett responds to us as the people who provide him with day-to-day direction and requests. Again, because of some of the expansion of his role, the hospital will provide him with some asks about their specific recruitment needs, but from a physician standpoint, learners, locums, scheduling, physician retention, he responds to our requests, and the governance group really does function at a governance level.
If we were to ask the funders about return on investment, what do you think they'd assess it at their return for their dollars invested?
It's a good question. And, we haven't really asked that specific question, but what I can say is maybe a bit of a proxy is that no one has hesitated to continue to fund this position. There has never been a statement at the table, and industry is not at the table. Actually, they have simply continued to fund a portion of what we pay Brett. I think there's generally a very high level of satisfaction that has led people not to even question the value of the investment, but simply to say, well, you know what, we have not had any shortage of physicians in the last 10 years, and we have had tremendous success with retention. And I think that's probably the greatest value of his role. I think we tend to focus on recruitment, but recruitment and replacement of physicians is a very costly endeavor in the States. It's estimated to cost about $1 million to fill a physician vacancy, a family physician vacancy in a rural community. I don't have those numbers from a Canadian context, but I think the huge value in retention can't be overstated, actually. And I would say that part of what Brett's role does that's fundamentally the key to retention is that he enables us as clinicians to do the things that we're really good at, which is clinical care, focus on clinical education, research, healthcare administration, where that's an interest and a skill. And we are not having to write emails. We're not recruiting. We're not putting together welcome baskets. We're not meeting people at midnight in a busy clinical week to try and welcome them to the community. Brett takes care of that. And because he allows us to focus on the things that A, we're good at, and B, we feel called to do, that's a huge feature in retention. When we look at things like perception of joy in work, we know that if clinicians can focus on the things that they train to do and the things that they're good at, they have a greater sense of engagement in their work, they have a greater sense of joy in their work, and they're much more likely to be retained in their workplaces. And I think the value of Brett's role from that standpoint really truly can't be overstated, I should say.
Thank you. So just to conclude, do you have top tips for other rural communities who want to establish a position and make it sustainable, so to be able to fund it ongoingly? What are your recommendations, Sarah?
I think the model that we have that enables Brett to focus on what he's really good at with a measure of flexibility and independence, but accountability to our needs, is a model that has worked really well. And if a community can come together collaboratively in trust that they can find a person who has the skill set and an understanding of the needs of the community, and if the community can come together in a collaborative way, recognizing that physician services and health services really are everyone's business, I think that that positions a philosophy of success around this kind of model. I think we have not thought deeply enough generally about the importance of this kind of role as a support to local clinicians. And if we can understand the way in which this role supports clinicians, enables them to do what they need to do and what the community needs them to do, then I think it becomes easier for communities to kind of get on board with that notion and to be able to articulate the reason for a budget line item that supports that kind of role. It becomes easy to articulate that to the community. So I think those underpinnings of vision, philosophy, seeing this as an investment, not a cost, really are key to how communities can move forward with this kind of role in support of their physician groups, which ultimately supports the needs of the communities.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So grateful for your time and meeting me in your evening and my morning. So thank you so much.